The storm raged across the barren expanse of Zyros 9, a forgotten battlefield where the wind howled like the dying screams of fallen soldiers. Rain pelted the jagged cliffs in uneven sheets, turning the ground below into a mire of mud and shattered rock. Somewhere within that chaos, Captain Elias Vance lay prone against the cold steel of an abandoned comms tower. His sniper rifle nestled firmly against his shoulder. The target was 2 clicks away, a Zeldar Dominion general stationed within a fortified outpost. Intel suggested he was overseeing troop movements, preparing for an imminent assault against the dwindling Terran forces in this sector. That attack could not be allowed to happen. Vance inhaled slowly, regulating his heartbeat. Wind speed, gravitational pull, and atmospheric pressure, all calculations flickered across the heads-up display inside his visor. He had mere seconds to adjust for the turbulence before the opportunity would be lost. Through the enhanced optics of his scope, he focused on the general, a hulking reptilian figure clad in segmented armor, his deep-set yellow eyes scanning a holographic battle map. He was surrounded by guards, but that hardly mattered. Vance didn't miss. His trigger finger tightened, then stilled. He counted his breaths. 1, 2. A break in the wind. The briefest moment of clarity in the storm. The rifle barely made a sound as it fired, the silencer and subsonic round ensuring the shot remained a phantom in the dark. A fraction of a second later, the general's head snapped backward, the impact so precise it barely registered to those standing near him. They hesitated, confused, searching for a threat that wasn't there. Then chaos erupted. Vance was already moving. He detached from his perch, dismantling his rifle with practiced efficiency as he slid down the rain-slicked framework of the tower. His exfiltration route was mapped, but contingencies were always necessary. The Zeldar would lock down the area within minutes, scanning for heat signatures, deploying patrols, flooding the battlefield with drones. Stealth wasn't just an advantage, it was survival. By the time the first sirens wailed across the enemy encampment, he was already slipping through the ruins below, his adaptive camouflage engaged, blending seamlessly into the environment. His breathing was slow and measured. The infiltration began under the cover of a dying star. Elias Vance drifted through the void, a single figure encased in matte black armor, his body cocooned within the cramped interior of a stealth insertion pod. Outside the thin layer of reinforced plating, the cold vacuum stretched endlessly, broken only by the distant glimmer of Zurich Prime, the Zeldar Dominion's most fortified world. Its surface burned with the artificial glow of war machines, towering citadels, and defensive turrets designed to obliterate anything that approached uninvited. The pod's trajectory was precise, a sliver of movement against an expanse of nothing. The heat signature was masked, the descent calculated to exploit a momentary gap in the planetary sensor grid. Timing was everything. His visor display counted down in silent increments, measuring altitude, velocity, atmospheric resistance. He flexed his fingers, adjusting his grip on the rifle strapped across his chest. A single mission. One target. One shot. The impact was brutal. The pod slammed into the surface of Zurich Prime like a meteor, embedding itself deep into the shifting dunes of the planet's desolate outer wastes. A pulse of sand erupted outward, then settled, swallowing the impact zone in obscurity. The pod's hatch hissed open, expelling a rush of compressed air, and Elias stepped out into the world of his enemy. The desert stretched endlessly before him, a wasteland of jagged rock formations and swirling dust storms that howled like spectral voices. Zurich Prime was a fortress, but beyond its core strongholds, the terrain was merciless. No water. No shelter. Just endless miles of scorched, lifeless ground where only the strongest survived. Elias moved quickly, his adaptive camouflage blending his outline into the landscape, rendering him little more than a heat distortion beneath the twin moons above. A mission brief echoed in his mind, committed to memory through repetition. Overlord Scarveth, a ruthless warlord and one of the Dominion's most feared commanders, was stationed within a high-security citadel. Killing him would send shockwaves through the enemy's ranks, crippling their offensive and forcing the Dominion into retreat. But the citadel was impenetrable. Reinforced walls, shielded barriers, aerial surveillance. A direct assault was impossible. The shot would have to be taken from outside the defenses, from a location yet to be determined. Elias moved like a shadow through the wasteland, his boots making no sound against the cracked stone. The trek to the outer perimeter of the citadel was grueling, each step taken under the watchful eye of unseen sentries. His visor displayed motion signatures, patrolling drones hovering just beyond the ridges, their sleek metallic forms cutting through the dust-filled sky. He stayed low, using the natural contours of the land to break his outline. The Zeldar relied on their technology, their overwhelming force. Elias relied on instinct. 2 hours passed before he reached the edge of the cliffs overlooking the enemy stronghold. The view was staggering, a monolithic fortress of metal and stone, pulsing with an eerie crimson glow. Spires of weapon emplacements jutted into the sky, and a massive energy shield hummed faintly, wrapping the structure in an impenetrable cocoon. He exhaled slowly, scanning for a vantage point. A ruined observatory, half buried in sand, perched just outside the shield's edge. It was old, likely a relic from a forgotten civilization before the Zeldar claimed this world as their own. A kilometer away. Close enough for a shot, but not without risk. He began his ascent, each movement deliberate, each pause measured. A single mistake here would mean death. The higher he climbed, the thinner the air became, the wind whistling through the hollowed-out remains of ancient buildings. He reached the observatory, stepping inside what remained of its upper chamber. The structure had long since collapsed, leaving only a skeletal framework of rusted beams and shattered glass. He moved into position, deploying his rifle against a reinforced strut, aligning his scope with the fortress below. The target was there, standing on an elevated command platform, surrounded by armored sentinels. Scarveth was monstrous even by Zeldar standards, a behemoth clad in war-torn battle armor, his scarred visage a testament to the countless campaigns he had led. He was issuing orders, his clawed hand gesturing toward a holographic map of a Terran-controlled sector. The warlord was planning something. A strike, an invasion. Time was running out. Elias steadied his breathing, adjusting for wind resistance, gravitational pull, and the atmospheric distortion caused by the shield's residual energy. It was an impossible shot, the kind that only existed in stories. A sharp static flickered in his earpiece. A low whisper. "Silent Shadow, you in position?" His voice was calm. "Acquired the target. Take it clean. No second chances." He already knew that. His crosshairs hovered over the warlord's head, his finger resting lightly against the trigger. He counted the variables. Distance, angle, shield disruption intervals. His heartbeat slowed. The world faded away. A sudden vibration rattled through the observatory. His muscles tensed. Something was wrong. His visor flashed red. Proximity alert. He wasn't alone. A faint shuffle of movement behind him. He rolled instinctively, just as a plasma blade carved through the space where his head had been. A Zeldar scout, its reptilian eyes gleaming in the dim light, its form nearly invisible against the darkness. Elias reacted without hesitation, his combat knife flashing as he lunged. The two figures collided in a brutal exchange, their movements swift and lethal. The Zeldar was fast, but Elias was faster. A feint. A shift. The blade found its mark. The scout gurgled as blood spilled from its throat, its massive form collapsing to the ground. Elias didn't hesitate. He dragged the body into the shadows, wiping his blade clean in a single fluid motion. He had seconds before the enemy noticed the missing patrol. His rifle was still in place. The shot was still possible. But now, the hunt had begun. Elias settled behind the rifle once more, his breath steady despite the warm trickle of blood running down his forearm. The scout had come too close. That meant others might be sweeping the area soon. He adjusted his scope, pushing everything else aside. The shot had to come first. Through the magnification, Overlord Scarveth remained exactly where he needed to be, standing at the center of his war council, issuing commands with the confidence of a creature that had never known fear. His heavy armor gleamed under the red glow of the citadel's floodlights, his clawed hand sweeping across a projected tactical map as his officers absorbed his orders. Every gesture, every movement radiated authority. Kill the head, and the body falls apart. Elias exhaled slowly, letting muscle memory take over. His visor adjusted for the shield distortion, mapping wind speed, gravitational shifts, and the micro-fluctuations in temperature that could nudge the bullet from its intended path. A shot like this demanded precision beyond calculation. It required instinct, the kind honed through years of impossible kills. He let his breathing sink with his heartbeat. 1, 2. The trigger squeezed beneath his finger, breaking the silence with the softest whisper of release. At this distance, the impact was delayed. For a fraction of a second, nothing changed. Then, the warlord's head snapped back, a jagged exit wound spraying across the war map in a smear of deep violet. His towering form crumpled, his body collapsing like a fallen monument. For the briefest moment, the entire command platform was still. Then the alarms blared. Elias was already moving. He slung his rifle onto his back and launched himself from the ruined observatory, rolling as he hit the rocky slope below. Plasma fire lanced through the darkness behind him, slicing through stone and metal alike. The Zeldar were reacting faster than expected. Good. That meant they were afraid. His exfiltration route led down through the ravine, a winding path of broken rock and uneven terrain. It offered cover but also slowed him. Drones whirred overhead, their sensors sweeping the area, locking onto heat signatures. He kept his movements erratic, breaking line of sight when he could, but the Zeldar were relentless. Their guttural war cries echoed across the valley as squads poured out of the fortress, boots pounding against the ground in pursuit. A heavy thud shook the earth behind him. Then another. Elias risked a glance over his shoulder. War beasts. The Dominion rarely deployed them outside of full-scale assaults, which meant they were taking no chances tonight. Hulking creatures, half armor, half muscle, their massive clawed feet crushing stone as they surged forward. Thick metal plating ran down their spines, reinforced with kinetic dampeners to withstand explosive rounds. They could track by scent, by movement, by the faintest tremor in the air. One of them roared, the sound like rolling thunder in the cavernous expanse of the ravine. Elias pushed harder, every muscle burning as he vaulted over a jagged outcrop, sliding down a steep incline toward his... The interior of the dropship vibrated with the deep hum of its engines, the reinforced hull rattling as it pushed through the upper atmosphere. Elias remained still, his breathing measured, muscles aching from exertion. The extraction had been close, too close, but he was alive, and the mission was complete. That should have been enough. Across from him, the pilot adjusted their headset, fingers dancing across the control panel with practiced ease. The ship banked sharply, angling toward deep space where a cloaked cruiser waited beyond the Dominion sensor range. The Zeldar would be scrambling to respond, but without their warlord, their efforts would be disjointed. Confusion bred hesitation, and hesitation meant opportunity. Elias pulled off his helmet, raking a hand through damp hair. His pulse was still high, his body wired from the kill, but beneath it, something nagged at him. A whisper of unease buried beneath the certainty of success. He had executed the mission flawlessly. One shot, one kill. And yet, a gnawing instinct told him this wasn't over. The pilot glanced over, their expression unreadable beneath the dim glow of the cockpit displays. "You look like a man who just made the shot of a lifetime. Why don't you seem happy about it?" Elias didn't answer right away. He let his gaze drift out the viewport, watching as the swirling hues of the planet's upper atmosphere gave way to the endless void beyond. "Something feels off." The pilot scoffed. "You just decapitated the Dominion's most feared warlord. You should be celebrating." But that was just it. The Zeldar were brutal, calculating, always 3 steps ahead. Scarveth was many things: ruthless, cunning, merciless, but careless? Never. And yet, there he had stood in the open, on an exposed platform, vulnerable in a way no seasoned warlord should have been. The thought settled uncomfortably in Elias's gut. He reached for his rifle, checking its systems with a methodical precision that had long since become second nature. The weapon was undamaged, the barrel still faintly warm from the shot. He had made the kill. He had seen Scarveth fall. There was no denying it. And yet, a sharp chime cut through the ship's interior. An alert flashed red on the pilot's console. "Incoming transmission," they muttered, frowning. "Encrypted. Unknown source." Elias tensed. That wasn't protocol. The only communication they should be receiving was from the extraction team aboard the cruiser. The pilot hesitated, then tapped the interface. The screen flickered, static bleeding through before resolving into an image. A face emerged. Not human. Not Scarveth. But close. Elias's fingers curled into a fist as he stared at the figure on the screen. The resemblance was uncanny. The same broad, reptilian features, the same gleaming dark eyes that burned with something beyond rage. A low, rumbling voice filled the cabin, thick with the Dominion's guttural accent. Impressive. The figure leaned forward, studying him with predatory amusement. You killed my brother. Efficiently. Cleanly. A pause. Then, a slow, terrible smile. But did you really believe we would leave our empire in the hands of one? Elias's stomach dropped. A successor. No, not just a successor. A plan. A contingency. The Dominion had never relied on a single warlord. Scarveth's death wasn't a crippling blow. It was a transition. A calculated sacrifice. The realization struck like a hammer. The mission hadn't ended anything. It had only set the next phase in motion. The figure on the screen tilted its head, eyes glinting with cruel amusement. I will see you soon, Silent Shadow. The transmission cut. For a moment, the only sound was the distant hum of the ship's engines. The pilot let out a low curse. That's bad. Elias didn't move. He let the weight of it settle, the bitter understanding of what had just happened. One shot. One kill. But the war wasn't over. It had only just begun.